Hi, today we are in the office of GetYourGuide in Berlin. And next to me is sitting one of the founders, Johannes. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Johanness and I'm the co-founder and CEO of GetYourGuide.
And what did you do before you started this company?
I was actually a biochemistry student originally, so I worked in a lab. I worked on learning and memory with mice at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And after that, I had a brief stint as a management consultant for the Boston Consulting Group before I actually went off and co-founded GetYourGuide along with a couple of fellow students at the university in Switzerland.
Was this your first contact to entrepreneurship?
Well, GetYourGuide was already a student project during the time when I went to university. So I would say sort of like the prequel to GetYourGuide, which was a slightly different platform to what we are today, which was a student project for already I think a year or two before we literally went into creating GetYourGuide as you know it today. Was my first contact to entrepreneurship, but before that I had none. I was also still when GetYourGuide and the GetYourGuide journey started, I was 25 years old.
And did you start this student initiative or did you just join?
No, I started it.
Ah, cool. Okay. How would you describe to the people out there how your typical business day looks like and how it changed from maybe the beginnings of the company?
Well, the very beginnings of the company were pretty simple. So we had a small room which pretty much looked like a garage. It wasn't a garage, but it was more or less I would say the equivalent. At the university, no air conditioning, and there was just one single window, and we had our little server standing in the same room, and everyone was doing everything. So everyone was coding, everyone was doing design, everyone was doing customer service, everyone was doing sales. So there was no real division of labor yet. I would say it was very basic, and it was a great time. We basically studied throughout the day, and then at the nighttime we came together in this small room and stuff like coded through and hacked our way to the first prototype. And fast forward 4 years, it's significantly changed. I would say my days today are mostly dominated by running the executive team and the strategy for GetYourGuide. Investor relations is a big piece of it. I have to keep our shareholders aligned and our vision aligned, and then finally I would say a lot of my time goes into HR and recruiting. So I talk a lot to the employees and try to figure out how we can improve the management of the company. And I'm also very much involved in getting new talent on board, which is pivotal for a startup at our stage. It's the most important thing that we have high caliber new recruits, and that's something that I'm really excited about and also very involved in.
Okay. Let's talk about the business model of GetYourGuide. What is the current business model of GetYourGuide?
Well, GetYourGuide, maybe just to explain it, GetYourGuide started off when I described the student project and the prototype. GetYourGuide started off as a peer-to-peer marketplace. So students could log in and become professional tour guides on our platform and sell their services to other travelers or other students. A little bit like a couch surfing or Airbnb, if you want, for students and for sightseeing. And that never really worked out, so we very much tanked that idea, and within 1.5 or 2 years, we realized that that wasn't going anywhere. And what we decided to do then was to take a second stab at the market, because what we saw was that a lot of local professional sightseeing tour and activity companies that exist all over the world cannot really market themselves very well on the web. And there's not an open portal where you can just log in and so you create your content and then get distribution in the travel world. That just didn't exist. And the traditional value chain was extremely fragmented, where only a few lucky ones got favored and got distribution. Particularly the big landmarks like an Eiffel Tower, or maybe like the big Broadway musicals, those kind of like highlights. But the market, as we looked into it, turned out to be extremely distributed. That's a very big long tail of local travel activity suppliers. Just to give you an example, a local Berlin Segway tour company, or the food tour through Paris, or the interesting movie tour in LA. Just to name a few, and there's many others and many different verticals in it, and all of that hadn't been brought together. And we thought, hey, what about we sort of like turn our original peer-to-peer model that wasn't working around, and what about we create something new, which is more of a professional marketplace for travel activities, where we have a real extranet for suppliers to log in and self-manage and their inventory and their pricing and their yield management, and on the other hand have customers that have the opportunity to book all these great services in a destination. And how the business model then turned out, was very naturally in that whenever customers came to our website and found this great content and wanted to make a reservation, we would get a commission fee off of every booking that was made. And later on, we also discovered that within the travel industry, there was high demand for these sort of products and for this sort of content. And what we then did was that we wrote an API for our platform where travel industry agents or intermediaries or publishers could take our content and market it through their websites, and again take a commission in between, and we would host the entire transaction and would also get a fee that we would split with the publisher. So it's very much a B2C or B2B2C model, where we always control the transaction and get a commission fee for every transaction that's made, which is a great proposition, because at the end of the day we're only billing our suppliers for bookings that actually happen. We don't book them for listings, so we don't book them, we don't bill them for clicks.
Yeah, like a performance marketing initiative.
Very traditional performance marketing. And that's the way how the travel industry as a broader industry also works. So in the hotel reservation space, which has gotten extremely big over the past 10 years on the web, it's exactly the same model, with slight nuances. For Airbnb or vacation rentals, it's the same model. Yeah. For flight bookings, it's the same model.
When you started this kind of business, or had the business idea, was this business idea really related to the student initiative, or was it just that you got some idea in the student initiative and then took it and founded your company?
No, it was a more traditional startup, in the sense that we had this idea, and then we actually attended university classes in order to learn how you can found a company, and what the legal structure behind it is, and what the financial frameworks are, and but we had this idea of digitizing exciting things to do in destinations and making them accessible on the web. That was the basic idea that we've been following for the past 6 years.
And what have been your major assumptions when you had to decide for whether you would like to pursue this kind of idea, and how did you test these assumptions?
To be honest, looking back, I think we didn't have many assumptions, and I think we didn't have much of a clue, so I would say I'm a lucky guy who stumbled into something great, like most great companies, by the way. But the only assumption that I think we really made from the very beginning is that we thought that the market opportunity was very big, and that the turnover generated in travel activities worldwide and in each destination is very big and goes into the hundreds of millions or billions, and that we validated through talking to local suppliers. But that was about the only thing that we really validated, I would say. We didn't really look into much more than that.
Okay, and what has been the major challenges for you for reaching your first million in visitors, for example?
It's always hard to pinpoint specific challenges, but I think the key challenge that every entrepreneur goes through in the early days is insufficient resources and a huge endeavor. I think that's just generally that's the key point. You only have so much time, to get some traction, or show that your model is working to a certain degree. before you run out of funds, or you can't finance yourself. And the way how we dealt with that was that in the beginning we just didn't spend money, and everything we did ourselves. So we had a totally do-it-yourself mentality where we were hosting our own servers. And writing all the code for the server hosting ourselves. So we didn't do anything externally with that. As I said, we had our little server in that tiny room. We built the code ourselves. We didn't have any employees. We weren't paying ourselves any salaries, or only sort of like as much as we needed to get the daily soup. And we're extremely self-sufficient. We were burning very, very little money. I mean, I think all the way to the company turning over millions and millions of dollars already. We had burned through tiny amounts of funding. Obviously, as we then scaled, we put a lot more funds to work. But in the early days, we were pretty self-sufficient.
And did you bootstrap your company, or was this? And to which point?
Well, it was semi-bootstrapped. So we were lucky that we actually the founders put in money themselves in the very beginning, which I guess you would call bootstrapping, and we were living off of these funds. But additionally, we got some money from a very early angel who had built travel.ch, which is Switzerland's biggest travel agency, and from the local cantonal bank, which was a historically interesting thing. But back in 2009, 2010, when the company was founded, there was a lot of liquidity in the Swiss banking market.
A grant or a loan or equity?
No, it was actually equity investment.
Interesting.
It's very, very bizarre. I mean, today I think banks wouldn't do that anymore. But back then it was the historic thing that they did it, and we got lucky and got some investment. So, but it was the majority of the money came from out of the founders' pockets. So we were bootstrapped in that way.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the corporate strategy of GetYourGuide. What do you think is the competitive advantage of your company over competitors, and how do you try to maintain it or grow this competitive advantage?
I think a competitive advantage for a marketplace model like ours is fairly easy. You have two pieces to the equation. One is the demand, and the other is the supply. And you build up the supply, and then you build up the demand, and then you match the two. And the more liquidity you get on each side, the more you drive your marketplace, and the more valuable the asset becomes. And I think everything that we've been focused around at the end of the day was to increase liquidity in our marketplace from the first day on. And I think we've already come a very long way in that. A lot of the businesses on our marketplace today actually make their living off of it. Sort of like it is a substantial part of their earnings. And I think this will only go up. I think ultimately we will become more and more important as a revenue stream for all the businesses on our platform. And then we also will make the entire market bigger, because a lot of people that previously weren't even into sightseeing or doing things when they were traveling now find it very easy and accessible, and actually find that it's a much better way to travel. So I think we will make the market bigger, and we will make, increase the liquidity of the existing monetary streams that now come increasingly through mobile and through the web. And I think the more liquidity we can drive, the more competitive advantage we will have towards any competitor, because competitors always need to build up the same thing, and marketplaces are very difficult to replicate in a way that you have to get the supply and you have to become relevant to them. And I would say if you would found GetYourGuide again today, or if I would have the task to compete against our own company, with everything that I know, I would know that it's very, very difficult, because I would need to create the same dynamics that this company already has, which today would mean spending a lot of money on marketing, on supply, and to ramp it up to the same degree is extremely difficult. Because there are so many small pieces to it, and ultimately, I could name you, from the marketing and the customer service and sales, etc., etc. There are like so many small competitive advantages, but I think it all boils down to the concept of how big the liquidity is between the two pieces, and you need all these small pieces to build it up.
Let's talk about the market for traveling. how do you perceive the past development and in terms of the market size, the market growth, profitability, and maybe in some specific segments? And what would be your forecast for the future?
Well, I think the travel market is a very interesting market. When we started, it was actually already written off as, more or less done online. Now we see a lot of investment coming back into the online travel market because there were a couple of, fantastic outcomes for investors in the travel market in the past 3-4 years. Companies like Kayak or Trivago from Germany. I would say generally we're still very early days, so the technology and the travel market is ripe for disruption in many parts, to put it mildly, particularly in the traditional airline and also the hotel pieces. Our market is a little bit of an ignored area inside of travel that has no technology, and which is also great because it allows us a lot of room to build technology into that piece of the market. I think generally the travel market is notorious for being a very, very, very big market. I think it's next to probably healthcare and oil and gas and banking and finance is probably one of the top 3-4 biggest markets in the world. It has on average very low margins and a lot of distribution in it, and a lot of cross distribution. I think consolidation in that fragmented distribution market, also stuff like through the distribution itself, but then also the technology that enables that. I think any sort of consolidation there will happen over time and will be very interesting for investors and also new entrants.
And how do you think in this kind of market setup that you described, how should one self-position in it? To, for example, I mean, as you talked about the value chain, you could position yourself maybe in a slot where the margins are higher, for example.
That's right, but it's always, you always have to think about, margins versus volume. I've seen great, flights, for instance, in the travel market are notorious for low margins. I've seen a couple of fantastic businesses set up on flights, for instance, Skyscanner out of the UK, great business, lives off of flights. Kayak in the US, also great business, more of a flight hotel combination, but also heavy on flights, but they just produce large amounts of volume. On the flip side, you can go into more niche markets. A lot of companies target the, I would say, more upscale travel market where margins are higher. It really always depends on the business model and how you can get to scale. I think at the end of the day in travel, whatever you do, you have to have a very, very solid grasp of your unit economics and of how you scale a company. It's very easy in travel to scale losses because the margins are a little bit slimmer than in other verticals. And the repeat behavior of customers more difficult because customers don't repeat as often because they only travel once a year or twice a year. So you have to have a very, very good sense of your unit economics and how you scale the company. I think that's the key in travel. So
this would mean I would have to earn money on the first company of the first customer who comes, and not building on the belief that the customer will come repeatedly.
I think ultimately you have to get the customer to come repeatedly, and that's something that everyone works on, but from my understanding and from what I've seen is that most or all successful travel companies make money on the first transaction.
Okay, understood. As we from Entrepreneurial Insights try to help young entrepreneurs and give them some advice from more senior entrepreneurs, what would be your advice for bootstrapping in a very good and efficient way? Because you have some experience in this.
I think for bootstrapping, so the most important thing about bootstrapping is I think that you have a very clear objective where you want to go, because a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake that they bootstrap for too long, and I always find that you have to know exactly what you want to do, and then you have to go after it, and you also have to be ready to pull the plug if you see that it isn't working. So I think creating clear objectives and outcomes is something that I find is very important, and that isn't done enough by people who do bootstrap. Particularly around here in Berlin, standard of living is fairly cheap. You can bootstrap for years, but I think that isn't any productive. I think bootstrapping should just be a way to get started into the company and get your initial proof, and you should have very clear objectives around that. I think another thing that I would say besides objectives is that when you're bootstrapping, you're typically working, with a few other people that believe in the project and the vision. I would think the right incentive structure for all these people that are on board, meaning equity or options, and thinking that through as an entrepreneur, I think is very important. And also thinking about this already very long term, so how's this going to turn out in 4 to 8 years, and how are decisions being made in my company, and what's the shareholder structure, then also when new angels or VCs later come in. I think that's another thing that I would really think about in depth, and there's a lot of literature about that on the web these days. Not as much when I started, but today there's a lot of literature on it, and I think that's something that I would really pay very close attention to.
So thank you very much, Johannes, and maybe you can visit GetYourGuide next time.
Absolutely, I'd be delighted.